Hello everyone, welcome to Fantasy Football Insider. I'm Dan Labbe, he is Chris Fedor, and he is here to answer your fantasy football questions. So jump down in the comments, ask away. We'll get to as many as we can throughout the next 20 minutes or so as we talk fantasy football. Chris, how'd your week one go?
My week one went great. By the way, I like your shirt on 9/11 day. That's very patriotic.
I guess.
Good touch there. But my week went great. I had 4 leagues, went 3-1. So I'll take that.
There you go. I have 1 league I want to know.
Well, good job.
Yeah, look at me.
Attaboy.
Thank you, Matthew Stafford. Anyway, all right, let's get to it. We're going to talk running backs. A lot of running backs here early on because our first question in our comments chat is Toby Gerhart, Chris Johnson, or how about this? Browns running backs being relevant, Terrance-West.
Well, I think all 3 are actually good options, Dan. Chris Johnson is coming off a pretty good game. New York has a good matchup on the road against Green Bay. Everybody saw Green Bay be susceptible to the run against Marshawn Lynch and Percy Harvin. But when it's week one, you have to ask yourself, okay, is that a sign of things to come, or is that based on the opponent that they went against? And I honestly think that more of that had to do with Seattle and the fact that Green Bay had to account for Russell Wilson and Percy Harvin and Marshawn Lynch. And Marshawn Lynch is simply way more talented than Chris Johnson. So even though I like him, I'm going to take him out of the mix this time because I think Green Bay bounces back this week. So now it's between Toby Gerhart and it's between Terrance-West. Obviously monitor the injury situation of Gerhart. He got dinged up in the first game. Surprise, surprise. Every time Toby Gerhart gets any kind of opportunity, he gets hurt. So I'm going to go with Terrance-West here. Unless somebody says that Toby Gerhart is 100%, he's full go, I'm going to go with Terrance-West. He got the work between the 20s for the Browns. The Browns are a team that wants to run the football. I think one of the strengths of New Orleans is their pass rush and their secondary with the 2 safeties, Kenny Vaccaro and Jarvis Byrd. So I don't think the Browns are going to try and throw the ball against New Orleans. I think they're going to continue to establish that run. A strong offensive line. Terrance-West, I think, is going to be the featured back. I'm going with West here.
Okay, now another guy to watch, of course, and he had a big second half against Pittsburgh, Isaiah-crowell. He had 2 touchdowns against Pittsburgh. He's going to be splitting time with Terrance-West. I mean, this is a guy you got to like.
I smile just thinking about Crow. I do. He's always been one of my guys. He was one of the most talented running backs in the NFL draft this past year. He slid out of the draft because of off-the-field issues. Everybody saw the talent on display. His first carry was a touchdown. Now, it was blocked really well, and the Browns' offensive line dominated in the second half of that game. But Crowell is somebody who I think Mike Pettin is going to lean on near the goal line. He doesn't have the fumble issues that Terrance-West did, or at least did in the preseason. And I think Mike Pettin knows teams do not like to tackle Isaiah-Crowell. He is a bull. He runs angry. He's a violent guy. So I think when the Browns get inside the 20 into the red zone, I think it's Crowell time. And I think because of that, he's still going to be relevant from a touchdown perspective.
It's weird. The Browns are relevant this week in fantasy football.
Amazing.
All of a sudden, last week, I think we were kind of scratching and clawing to find at least like one Browns topic to talk about. And now here we are. Their running game, and we know the Browns will want to run the football too. This isn't a team that's going to have a couple of good running backs and they're just going to throw the ball a bunch. They want to run the football. That's supposedly their philosophy.
Yeah, and I hope people don't get carried away, though, with Crowell.
No.
And I like him, and I think he's going to have a role moving forward in this offense. But if you remember a couple of years ago, a lot of people went to the waiver wire. They took Peyton Hillis, and that was a huge get because he was clearly the new featured back for the Browns, a guy who kind of came out of nowhere. I don't expect Crowell to be that because he still is battling for carries with Terrance-West. Now, if West goes down and Tate and West are both missing, then it's the Crow show. But until that happens, West, I think, is the guy that you want to have in fantasy football.
Of those 2 guys, if you're going to take a guy and maybe you'll start him this week as a flex or something like that, or if you really need a lot of help at running back, maybe he's one of your 2 backs. Is he a guy, though, of those 2 guys, who would you most rather stash on your roster? A guy that you would maybe just sit down at the bottom of your roster and see what happens?
I would say Terrance-West, just because it seems like, Dan, he's going to get the work between the 20s. And touchdowns are one thing that are so difficult to predict in fantasy football. And I think they're tough to predict in football. And banking on Isaiah-Crowell because he's the touchdown vulture, because he's the guy in the red zone, I think that's risky. I think you'd rather lean towards the opportunity of Terrance-West. Who knows if he's going to get passes thrown his way? That was not in the game plan of the Browns. It was more passing to Andrew Hawkins and the tight ends. But between the 20s, there are just more yards to be gained there.
Other side of the football, we see this a lot with the Saints. They kind of go running back by committee a lot, and every week it could be a different guy for them. Who do you like in their stable of running backs?
If it's PPR, I like Pierre Thomas because he's going to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's going to be used in a role similar to Darren Sproles. He's not as talented. Nobody's going to say that he is, but Drew Brees likes to throw to his running backs, and he likes to have that outlet. And Pierre Thomas is the best pass catcher among the three. It's not Mark Ingram. It's not Kyrie Robinson. So if I had to pick one in PPR, I'm going to go with Pierre Thomas. If it's not PPR, I'm going to go with Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram, Dan, is a guy who is starting to figure it out, and now he's in a contract year. At the end of last year, he was really good, averaging about 5 yards per carry in the preseason. He was really good, and in the first game against Atlanta, he was the guy who wore down the defense late in the game. He's somebody who has the ability to churn out 4 or 5 yards per carry. So Mark Ingram in a standard league, I think, has more value still than Pierre Thomas and Robinson.
How about Brandon Cooks? I know that was a guy you were on last week. He came through for you in a big way.
He sure did, and the matchup was part of it, obviously. But the thing that New Orleans doesn't move up in the first round to get guys to not use them, especially if they're wide receivers. And New Orleans wants as many weapons as possible. Drew Brees, he's a guy who will spread it out. It'll be a little bit of Jimmy Graham. It'll be a little bit of Marcus Colston. And it'll be a little bit of Brandon Cooks. And just look at this matchup in particular coming into this week against the Browns. More than likely, Joe Hayden is going to spend a lot of time on Marcus Colston. Colston doesn't have the same wheels that he used to have, but he's clearly the number one wide receiver for the Saints. The number one target, Jimmy Graham, but the number one wide receiver, and that's the guy that Hayden likes to match up against, that's Colston. So now you say, okay, look at what Marcus Wheaton did last week to the Browns' second cornerback. That could be Brandon Cooks this week, going up against either Buster Skrine or Justin Gilbert, and those kinds of guys feast.
What are you doing if you've got Eddie Lacy as one of your backs this week?
You're hanging on to him. You're not worried about it, and you're probably going to start him because all indications say he is going to start in this game. The thing that you have to remember about Lacy and the Packers, they played on Thursday Night Football, so he had an extra 3 days to try and recover from the concussion. Usually it's a week, and maybe somebody's going to be kept out for that 1 week for precautionary reasons. But those extra 3 days, I think, are going to give him the green light to go. And like I said, it's a tough matchup because it is against the New York Jets, but he's Eddie Lacy. You used a first-round pick on him. You want him in your lineup, no question about it. The thing that you have to hope, if you do have Eddie Lacy, that you were smart enough to handcuff him. Because James Starks is probably going to have a role moving forward. Eddie Lacy is a violent guy. He runs through contact. He runs to contact sometimes. And he does have a history of injuries. Not just concussions, but some ankle injuries as well. So you have to be worried about that. And let's hope that every Eddie Lacy owner has James Starks on that roster because you might be using him this year.
What if I'm counting on Zach Stacy as a guy to help my running game?
Well, I think that's a little bit nerve-wracking at this moment. I do, because it's not just the fact that St. Louis has some issues at quarterback. Zach Stacy dealt with those issues last year. Sam Bradford, at the end of last season, he got hurt, so they had to go to Kellen Clemens. He showed that he can still be effective running the ball if he's given the opportunities, Dan. The problem is he's not getting those opportunities. At least in week 1, he didn't. It was a true running back by committee with Zach Stacy and Benny Cunningham. Do I agree with it? No, I think Stacy's the more talented guy. But hey, they're going to do things the way that they want to do them in St. Louis. And part of what made Stacy so valuable at the end of last season going into the playoffs is that he was a 20-carry guy. He was a 25-carry guy. You didn't have to worry about him being taken off the field. He had all those opportunities. In week 1, he didn't have all those opportunities. It was a mix of Cunningham and Stacy. So I think right now Stacy is more of a flex option as opposed to a running back 1 or a running back 2. A lot of people drafted him to be a running back 1 or 2.
Joe in Tampa, he's got a wide receiver issue. He needs to pick 2 guys from the following list: Bolden, Fitzgerald, Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin. Pick 2.
Well, the thing with Fitz, it's a little bit concerning because of last week. Now, it's a great matchup playing against the New York Giants, but I think we're starting to see more and more that maybe Michael Floyd is the go-to guy for Carson Palmer and the Arizona Cardinals. I think Floyd, he's younger, he's more of a deep threat, and Fitzgerald just didn't get the looks last week. So right now you want to hang on to Fitz, but you don't want to be in the same boat that you used to be with him where I've got to start him every single week. What you want to do is you want to play the matchups. The good news is this is a good matchup. This is a matchup that I think you want to exploit against the New York Giants. Look at what Detroit did against the Giants. It was Calvin Johnson, but it was also Golden Tate. There are enough balls to go around in Arizona. So this week, because of the matchups, I'm going with Larry Fitzgerald. And you know what? I'm going to go with Jeremy Maclin. Okay. It's a Monday Night Football game. It's Philadelphia. It's against Indianapolis. It's probably going to be a high-scoring game. McAtack got in the end zone last week. You don't know how long you can use him. He is injury-prone. But he's Chip Kelly's guy. They're going to find a way to get him the football. I'll go with Maclin, and I'll go with Fitz.
Let's look back at week one. You always have guys that have big week ones. People scramble to pick them up on waiver wires. What was for real last week? Who were those guys that you saw kind of blew you away and you think, all right, this guy can do it for the rest of the season?
Kelvin Benjamin, not sure if he's going to be out there on waiver wires. A lot of people drafted Kelvin Benjamin, especially people that had their draft closer to the beginning of the season. But I think he's for real. Look, he's the '1 wide receiver in Carolina. And yeah, they're a team that wants to run the ball, and you don't know who's going to run the ball. But Benjamin's a big target, 6'5". Cam Newton, Derek Anderson, whoever is playing quarterback, they're going to throw to him. They are, because they have to, because it's only him and it's only Greg Olsen. So I think Kelvin Benjamin is for real. Dan, aside from that, you always have to be concerned about the week ones, especially because if you go back to a couple of years ago, actually, it was last year, now that I think about it. Kevin Ogletree, remember him? Mm-hmm. Remember, he came out of nowhere for the Dallas Cowboys, and he had that huge game, and people are like, hey, look, maybe we've got a new target here in Dallas. And it turned out you didn't have a new target in Dallas because he was somebody who was up and down for the rest of the year. So you have to be concerned, I think, with Allen Hurns of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think you have to be concerned about Justin Forsett of the Baltimore Ravens. You know, he had a good game last week. Obviously, Baltimore has some questions there in that backfield. No Ray Rice anymore. Maybe it's going to be a split of Forsett and Bernard Pierce, but part of the reason why Pierce was out of the game as early as he was, number one, he was recovering from a concussion, and number two, he fumbled the ball away. That was his first fumble, though. Yeah. So I don't think they're going to continue to send the message all season to Bernard Pierce. I don't think you can rely on Forsett for anything more than just a flex play. So of the guys who had that breakout week in week one, Dan, I think Kelvin Benjamin is the #1 guy that I'd go after if he's out there on waiver wires.
Who are you staying away from, though? That guy that had that big week one that you're saying, no, still, don't go get this guy. Give it a couple weeks.
Allen Hurns from the Jaguars. Look, everybody was excited about him in the preseason. I think Jacksonville feels like they have a steal there, but Jacksonville's a team that I think is going to struggle to score points all season long. They're going to be up and down, and he's still fighting for targets with Marquise Lee, if his hamstring issue that he injured in practice is not a big deal. And of course, Cecil Shorts is going to come back. So I think you have to look at everything that went into that game for Jacksonville. Number one, it was against Philadelphia. Last year, Philadelphia had the worst pass defense in the NFL, and they didn't do anything to improve that. Number two, Cecil Shorts was not in the game. He was inactive. So that led to targets. And number three, Jacksonville got off to that good start because it was against Philadelphia, and Allen Hurns got some opportunities. Are all those things going to come into play on a weekly basis? No. So he's a guy that maybe you want to stash on your roster and you want to roll out there in the good matchups, but don't go crazy. If you had #1 waiver priority, I hope you didn't use it on Allen Hurns because I think he's going to frustrate at times this year.
Who do I have to start this week?
Well, this week, Dan, I think obviously you have to look at some of the matchups. That's what you have to do in fantasy football. But the first thing that I would say is that you always start your studs, and you just live with the results. Yeah. A lot of people are down on Eddie Lacy because of last week playing against the Seahawks. People are down on Aaron Rodgers because he played against the Seattle Seahawks. So if you have a guy that is a stud, a guy that you drafted to be in your lineup every single week, you certainly want to go with him. Don't shy away just because of a matchup. All you have to do is learn how to live with those results. In terms of starts, look, Dan, at quarterback, I really liked what I saw from Colin Kaepernick. I did. And yes, it was against Dallas, and you're going to start everybody against Dallas, no doubt about that. but he came out firing. San Francisco has been a team in the past that wants to run the football with Frank Gore and some of the other weapons that they have in the backfield. And sure, they have Carlos Hyde right now, but this is a team that has invested in Michael Crabtree, and Colin Kaepernick, and Anquan Bolden, Vernon Davis, Stevie Johnson. They can throw the football. And this is a good matchup, I think, against the Chicago Bears. I think you can exploit that defense. It's a Sunday night game. It's the first game in the regular season at the new stadium for San Francisco. So I think Kaepernick is a guy that you want to have in your lineup this week, especially when you're talking about quarterback. At running back, Dan, I think C.J. Spiller is a sneaky play this week. He's coming off a pretty good game for Buffalo last week, and he's playing against Miami. Miami is dealing with a lot of injuries on defense. One of them is Donnell Ellerbe, their middle linebacker. He's out for the year. I think Buffalo is a team that is committed to running the football. They know they have to run the football. C.J. Spiller, I think, is a sneaky play against Miami this week.
Who's a regular guy that maybe you'd start every week you're staying away from in week 2?
Phillip Rivers is somebody that I would consider. See, he's not in the class of Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, and Peyton Manning. He's not that quote-unquote stud. He's somebody that you probably have as maybe a borderline quarterback number 1 or even a strong backup. So he's playing against Seattle. He's got a new center. There are just too many things that I'm concerned about there. With Phillip Rivers, another guy that I would be concerned with is Keenan Allen. Don't go crazy here, because the one thing that you know about Seattle's defense is Richard Sherman doesn't match up against particular guys. He plays one side. So there is a chance that San Diego tosses Keenan Allen away from Richard Sherman, and he still makes some plays. But he's somebody that is all about your options. You know, if you're deep at wide receiver and you've got 4 or 5, and you've got somebody who's got more of a favorable matchup, and he's somebody that you would consider starting probably for the remainder of the season, maybe then Keenan Allen gets bumped out of your lineup. But don't go taking Keenan Allen out of there for a guy like Allen Hurns, because you went and you got Allen Hurns from the Jacksonville Jaguars off the waiver wire, or maybe because you went out this past week and you went out and you got Andrew Hawkins because Hawk had 8 catches for the Browns. Don't be doing things like that, but be careful with Keenan Allen, I'll say that.
When you get a new toy, you got to use him, right? Like I went out and I got Isaiah-crowell. He's my flex this week. I don't care.
Geez,
He's my new toy, and I'm gonna put him in there, and he's going to be my flex guy.
Dan's not even worrying about it. He doesn't care that Terrance-West is probably going to get the majority of the carries. He just wants to roll out Crow. All right.
New guy, I got to use him.
I can understand.
All right, so we are going to talk to you again on Sunday before the Browns game, 11:20. We'll have a podcast up right before the Browns game so you can get last-minute fantasy advice from Chris Fedor. And we will be here every single week at 12:30 to answer your fantasy football questions, lineup questions, whatever you got. Come here and ask every week at 12:30. For Chris Fedor, I'm Dan Labbe.